The wind brushed past him, whisking leaves into the air and past his face. His cold, hardened, pale features looked forward, his eyes wistful and glossy. The rolling hills in front of him stretched far into the distance, curling around the village and its church spire before diving into the lake. He looked at the stone before him. A smile spread across his lips, forcing happiness into his mind. "Hey, Cal." He stopped, clearing his throat. "Mate." He struggled for words, thoughts and feelings firing from his mind, desperate to be the first to escape. "It's been a while," he continued. "I'm not sure how long. Susan usually keeps track of this kind of thing, but you know what happened." He stopped again, feeling the tears building in his eyes, his throat closing. "Of course you don't, silly of me to..." He stopped again, sighing. "She left about a year ago, staying with her mother." He chuckled. "You remember that old bat, don't you? I think it's about 10 years ago now. Susan and I just started dating, and I went to hers for dinner. It was meant to be followed by us going out with you and Lucy. Or at least I think that's what her name was. Back then, I could never keep track of your girlfriends' names. You used to shout the wrong one out quite a lot, at the wrong time especially, leaving me to pick up the pieces." He sat down and laced his fingers together, tucking his jacket under himself, keeping the mildew from soaking into his jeans. "Well, we were about to leave when Susan told her mother where she was going." He laughed heartily, the memory lingering for a moment. As his laughter fell, the tweets of the birds slowly rose, and the gentle breeze brushed past him again, causing him to shiver. "She was a bitch, wasn't she?" he continued. "Remember when she was our English teacher the first 2 years of secondary? How she would send us out of the class for literally nothing?" The thought replayed. Okay, maybe we did throw some rubbers and pencils and other such items at her, but it still wasn't warranted. He replayed the scene in his head, the rubbers hitting the back of the woman's skull and the cackling laughter that followed. Maybe he had been a bit of a cruel child. "Anyway," he muttered. "Enough about old memories." He paused and thought back to his week, his shopping routine, his excessive binge watching of shows and the amount of alcohol he had been consuming. Not much to talk about. "Not much has changed, really. With Susan gone, I don't have much to do. And without you, I don't..." The night replayed, and another tear brewed in his eye. The call, the weeping. "Oh!" he exclaimed, grinning as he recalled the thought. "Your team won!" He extended his arms as if someone would extend their own towards him, but his hands remained empty. "I've been following them, on your behalf of course, but I always seem to get the name wrong, despite you constantly telling me that and other things." He sighed contentedly, and the same warm feeling spread through him. "And for the life of me, I can't remember that now either." "Ah well, I remember the colours." He chuckled and sighed again, the tweeting birds returning to their usual song. "But, yeah, they won. Don't know if it was the other thing or a game, but they won something. Thought I'd let you know." His eyes glanced over the words. 5th of January, 2019. He tore his eyes away, the call replaying and the tears building again. Words once again fought their way from his mouth. Yeah. He coughed. "Sorry for not coming here in a while. Been kinda hectic with Susan and Greg, you know. Same excuses I had when you were..." He stopped again and swallowed his mourns. "Greg still asks about you. Kid still thinks you're grabbing him a Cadbury bar from Sainsbury's." I keep telling him you're gone for a while, but he doesn't listen. Wants to see his Uncle Callum every time we go see your mum. He paused again, looking over the hills and the tranquil village, its street lamps flashing on, at least an hour earlier than necessary, but a charm he had come to love. She's doing good, your mother, he went on. Her tea consumption is off the chart. A smile flashed across his face as he pictured the elderly woman sipping from her teacup, staring at an old photograph across the room, practically swimming in the stuff. He chuckled and glanced at the name, Callum McGregor. He reread it, the soft song of the birds matching the words, like they were strung together by a lyricist. She asked about Susan and Greg and everyone. She was always brilliant like that. He cleared his throat and picked some grass beneath him, twirling it around his fingers. Silence descended over him like a blanket, smothering him in wordlessness. The air was cold and the breeze mocking. The stone remained still, almost stoic against the weather, daring it to become worse. He smiled at the thought. Soon, the thought was lost and the words stopped fighting to come out. He was left in silence, his mind blank like a fresh canvas and his emotions raw, unfiltered. You know, he muttered, feeling the wind die down, allowing his words to fall. Everything was so much easier with you. You knew me and what I liked, who I liked. I could turn to you in any situation. When I was alone, there you were. Whether I wanted you or not. Usually with a beer and a grin. He laughed at the picture and lifted his head to the darkening sky, hoping the breeze would carry his tears away. When Susan gave birth, you drove me to the hospital. Well, you gave us a place to sleep when we couldn't find a place of our own. And you became the godfather of our child. A tear rolled down his cheek. But with her gone, I don't have anyone. And with you here... He cleared his throat and sniffed, sucking up some of the mucus trying to escape. So everything, you were there. And now, you're not. You're not. His sentence slowly died, absorbed into the tears and wails that took their place. He didn't know how long he wept, but by the time he lifted his head, the sun had set and left him. The birds were asleep, as was the village down the hills. Above him, a lamp shone down, covering him in an angelic glow, illuminating the grass and dirt around him. The words were now bright, as if admitting their own light, shining forth into the twilight. He sat back, placing his hands on the damp grass and looking into the sky, which was slowly becoming more starry and beautiful. It's been 3 years, he muttered. 3 years of this. He sighed and leaned forward, bringing his legs against his chest. The necklace hit him and he winced. Gently, he reached to his neck and pulled on the string around it, pulling the necklace from its position against his chest. Cautiously, keeping the jewellery itself in his line of sight, he lifted it over his head, pressing the jewellery piece in his hand, allowing the string to fall over the edge. He smiled again. The necklace was a piece of amethyst, carved into the shape of a tooth. The tooth itself wasn't human, more animalistic than anything, but a tooth nonetheless. One side was a deep purple, gradually getting brighter as it faded into white on the other side. The light above him shone through the purple, spreading across his hand like a disco ball. He closed his hand around it on the side. Remember when you gave this to me? He said. I had visited you for that week. He just lost a job, mother was sick, dad passed away the previous year. Susan and I just gotten married, and she was pregnant again. A girl. One you haven't met. He sniffed and looked back at the letters. You were in a bad place, and I wanted to make sure that you were alright. That you weren't taking the same way out your sister had. You seemed fine. But you were scared. And I wasn't sure what of. But you had that same look in your eye. The same look you had when I went off to university. The look that made it seem like it would be the last time we would ever see one another. So you accompanied me to the train station. And as I was about to get on, I turned to say goodbye, and you hugged me. He stopped and looked down at the tooth, the purple light returning across his skin. You had never hugged me before. You've only ever hugged your mother. But I assumed that you were scared because you thought you'd never be able to do so again. He sniffed and cleared his throat, tears slowly filling his eyes. Then you opened my hand and placed this into my palm. He waved the tooth in the air as if the stone could see it. You said, so you have a reason to see me again. He sniffed again. I thought you were being silly. You know, Callum McGregor, the man who turned my wedding into a live comedy gig. But I went along with it. And you watched as the train left the station. He chuckled and sighed. I've worn it since. Susan questioned why, and I told her. She thought I was being ridiculous. He cast his eyes back to the letters and a smile fell. But then I got that call. He paused and looked away. Barely a month later. He sighed and wrapped the string around his neck, and allowed the tooth to drop against his chest, bouncing against his woolen jumper. You decided to take a girl dancing, and 1 too many drinks later, you wrap yourself around a fucking tree. He could hear the phone ringing again, Susan turning as tears rolled down her face as she handed it to him. He coughed, pulling himself from the memory. Death on impact? What we were told. He chuckled lightly. Greg was so confused. He thought we just watched some sad TV. He couldn't understand why both Mummy and Daddy were crying. The moon had risen, peering through the clouds. He looked up at the stars, which were now bright against the black sky, like beacons of potential hope millions of miles away. The funeral was a week later. His hand rose to the tooth, clutching it desperately, like letting go would force him to forget. I couldn't be here, he whispered. I couldn't bring myself to see your name etched in stone every time I drove to work or brought Greg home. He looked beside himself, at the empty road that circled around the hill. I drive past here sometimes, when I'm thinking about taking the shorter route to bed that night. This route's long and winding, and wouldn't be surprised if I was found in a car wreck after a rainy night. He kept his eyes on the road, imagining the wheel losing control, the ground zooming closer, and the hideous crunch of metal and bone. The thoughts didn't disgust him. He tore himself from the road and back to the words. But then I see you, sitting here, proud, looking over these hills, and I remember you. And then I remember your necklace. I think you probably wouldn't want to be found on my bleeding, bloodied corpse in a flattened, mangled pancake of a car, probably crushing some poor old woman's flowers. He laughed and unconsciously touched the tooth. Even now, despite everything that's happened, you're still looking out for me. He stood and sighed, his hand still on the tooth. A smile stretched across his lips as he reached forward with his remaining hand, lightly stroking the top of the stone. He blinked slowly and then looked out into the village. The lights in the windows had gone out, but he could hear the joyful shouts of drunken men and women as they toured the village, drinking in every establishment they could find. It was odd what people did to forget. His smile widened as he saw a silhouetted group staggering underneath the nearest lamppost, laughing heartily and swaying, hanging off one another. He looked back at the words and smiled again, a familiar smile fading into his memory. He patted the stone. "See you tomorrow, mate," he whispered, before pulling out a hip flask and walking down into the village below, the tooth firmly in his grasp. Hello everyone, and thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you would like to read the story for yourself without my narration, please do check out my website, which is linked in the description below, where you can read this story and about a dozen others. If you did enjoy this video, give it a thumbs up, and if you would like to know when I release another one, please do subscribe and hit the notification bell. Once again, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.